Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a pretty powerful first-hand account from a moderator who uncovered a really troubling reality hidden inside her online community. It's a story about the weight of a secret and what happens when an online job suddenly gets very, very real.
And that right there, that really captures the heart of it. This whole thing started with an emergency phone call she never should have gotten, carrying a burden she never asked for.
Okay, so as a moderator for a private board for Escorts, she was a trusted leader. People looked up to her, which is why one evening her emergency line rings, and it pulls her into a crisis that would literally change everything. You see, this emergency line was basically a last resort, a lifeline for members who were in serious trouble. And on the other end of this particular call, it was a provider completely distraught after getting some bad news from her doctor.
The caller confesses that she's contracted 2 STIs, genital herpes and genital warts. But then comes the real bombshell. She admits she'd been having unprotected sex, what's often called bareback, with her clients.
So, after a really long, supportive conversation, it seemed like the situation was under control. The provider promised she would switch to all covered sessions from now on to keep everyone safe. And for a moment, it felt like, okay, crisis averted. The risk is contained.
But that feeling of relief, it didn't last long, at all. Just 2 days later, a brand new review for that same provider pops up online. And from the details in the review, it was crystal clear. That promise had been broken. The risk wasn't gone, it was still out there.
And just like that, the moderator is stuck in this impossible ethical situation. On one hand, you have this person's confidential health info. On the other, you have the safety of the entire community. And while she never explicitly promised to keep it a secret, it was kind of implied, right? You can just imagine her anxiety was through the roof. She was a total wreck trying to figure out what the right move was. And then the problem stopped being theoretical and landed right on her doorstep.
A potential new client calls her for an appointment. And who is his reference? The infected provider. The moderator knew she had to say no, obviously. But that brought up a much heavier question. Should she tell him why? Should she warn him about the danger he might have already been exposed to?
After wrestling with it all day, she made the incredibly difficult choice to break her silence. She called the man and explained exactly why she couldn't see him, revealing the other provider's diagnosis.
And his reaction? Wow. It was instant and it was absolutely devastating. It just laid bare the real human stakes of this whole secret. The consequences were already rippling out, threatening to shatter families. All of her worst fears were coming true, right there on the phone.
But here's the thing. That single, heartbreaking phone call wasn't the end, not by a long shot. It was actually the beginning. Because when she started confiding in a few trusted friends about what happened, she quickly learned this was not an isolated incident.
It was like her one confession just opened the floodgates. All of a sudden, emails and phone calls started pouring in from other people sharing stories about similar situations they knew about. The problem was way bigger than she could have ever guessed.
So she starts digging, right? And she starts to uncover this whole documented history of the problem. She found records of a huge HIV scandal from back in 2011 where a really popular provider was outed, and it just sent shockwaves through the community.
And it wasn't just old-form drama. She found public warnings, actual news stories, like one about a woman who got arrested for knowingly spreading HIV through ads she posted on Craigslist. These weren't just rumors. This was a real, documented pattern of behavior. What all this pointed to was this whole culture, really. She found forum posts where people were openly debating unprotected sex. There were clients bragging about trying to remove condoms. She even learned that a phrase like wife experience was often a code word. I mean, one person even called STD risks propaganda. It wasn't just a few bad apples. It was a mindset.
So all of this is horrifying, right? But it's still kind of abstract. It's out there. That all changed when a friend took all this information and made a chart. A chart that made the moderator's own personal risk terrifyingly, unavoidably clear.
Think of it like a family tree, but for potential infection. At the very top, you had the original infected provider. Then branches went out to all of her clients. And from those clients, even more branches fanned out to every single other provider they had seen. It was a terrifyingly simple map of how fast this could spread. And there, on that web, she saw her own name, twice. In that single moment, the danger stopped being a community problem, and it became her problem.
The feeling, she said, just made her want to vomit. The threat was no longer theoretical.
And if that wasn't bad enough, she then heard about a client who was openly HIV positive and who believed, chillingly, that he had zero obligation to tell any of his partners. So this web of risk wasn't just being created by accident. Sometimes it was being woven on purpose.
At this point, she was just done. Overwhelmed. She felt angry, scared, and it just felt so unfair that someone else's choices were now putting her career and her health on the line. She realized she couldn't control what anyone else did. The only person whose actions she could control was herself.
This fear, it was just eating away at her. It became this constant, nagging voice in her head with every single client, and it made it impossible to feel safe or to even do her job properly. She knew, for her own sake, something had to give. So she made a huge change, a really drastic one. She completely shifted her services away from anything high risk. Sure, it meant lower pay and a much smaller market of clients, but what she lost in money, she gained in something way more valuable: peace of mind.
In the end, after going through all of this, her journey led her to one powerful conclusion. She realized the only person's choices she could ever truly control were her own. You can't get rid of all the risk in the world, but you can, and you must, build your own boundaries to stay safe. It's a sobering thought that no matter how connected we are, our own safety ultimately begins and ends with us.